Hello, good evening, and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. UPSC Mains 2026 is underway. I always believe, whether it comes to prelims or mains, it is not only a test for a candidate appearing in the examination, it's also a test for a teacher, for an educator, whether what we have taught has appeared in the examination or not, whether we have prepared our candidates both for prelims as well as the mains examination. And today, I'm going to demonstrate with proof that whatever we have taught has appeared in the examination. And a student who would have followed us, whether in comprehensive course or you can or Conquer Mains initiative, you would have been able to answer all the questions holistically and you will score well in this examination. Today, in this session, we will discuss GS Paper 2, which talks about polity, governance, social justice, and international relations. Polity and governance-based questions I will be discussing first. Then Chetan sir would discuss international relations, and then Astha ma'am would discuss social justice related questions. Sure. Let's get started and let's first look at our upcoming course. All the students desirous of enrolling with us in Unacademy Plus subscription, where we will cover holistically prelims as well as mains, you can enroll with us at 19,999 and you can get 6 months extension as well. Don't forget to use this code IAS English while you are enrolling with us. Second, for the first time on Unacademy IAS English, we're coming up with a course specifically focused on the mains preparation. And it's going to be an intensive program just for the mains examination. We'll discuss PYQs, themes, concepts. Answer writing would be the focus area in this course. And it starts on the 2nd of September. It will end on 10th of January. We will have close to 240 hours of content specifically training you for the mains examination. PYQs, probable questions and answer writing. Weekly 5 questions will be given, and for that we will evaluate. GS-wise full length test would be provided. Handouts will be provided for every class, every session. Should you wish to enroll, you can do this at an introductory price of 9999. Sure. Let's get started and let's look at question number 1. If you look at all the questions, all the 20 questions asked in GS Paper 2, roughly 11 questions on polity and governance. Speaking for polity, the questions were relatively easier. And it is expected that all the candidates who have prepared well, thoroughly integrating with current affairs, you should have been able to score all the questions in this particular paper. Analyze the advantages and limitations of the generalist structure of Indian civil services in contemporary governance. Look at the topic. Role of civil services in a democracy. That's one of the topic of your GS Paper 2 main syllabus. Have we covered it in the class? This is the snapshot of my governance course. Even in the days of ICS, officers could select a branch of governance after a period of services such as social sector or economics so that they could specialize and perform better. This practice has since been abolished. The point is, what is the role of civil services in a democracy? Look at IAS and we say you are a generalist civil servant, jack of all trades, master of none. What are the advantages? What are the limitations? What is the way forward? Should there be a lateral entry into the services? Something recommended by Dr. Shashi Tharoor as well. All these points you need to integrate and then maybe pepper it up with a quote. And which is that quote? I'm going to tell you. For example, experts from fields like finance, infrastructure, technology, they bring technical know-how, which a generalist civil servant may lack. That is why there is a role of Niti Aayog's 3-year action agenda of 2017. You should have incorporated that. Similarly, conclusion can be, I'll give you a few ideas. Although an IAS officer is considered to be a generalist civil servant, but the domain expert, IAS officer, we say is a domain expert in the most difficult and complex of all domains, which is public administration, which is the witch brew of policies, demographics, politics, social imperatives, religion, law and order. He is an expert in balancing all these, sometimes contradictory elements, and still moves the nation forward. If you bring in a lateral entrant from a private sector, and from private sector where the focus is only on maximizing profit, you will never be able to get the balance right. So you will have to justify a generalist civil servant while writing an answer to this question. And look at the ancient wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, yoga karmasu kaushalam, the art of achieving perfection and efficiency in action. So even if you are a generalist civil servant who has been recruited after a rigorous civil services examination, and you're trained as a generalist, but over a generalist, and over a period of time, through your action, through your work, you become expert. So we don't necessarily need a domain expert, a lateral entry from a private sector or from any other sector to bring in expertise in civil services. That's question number one. Question number two, comment on the statement that transparency and accountability in governance aim not just to control corruption, but to build stakeholder trust through rule of law and participatory governance. Participatory governance, rule of law. This is the snapshot again of my governance classes. Rule of law. Rule of law is fundamental to good governance. Look at the quote of Aristotle. Without rule of law, governance becomes arbitrary and authoritarian. What is this rule-based governance? It means that laws are applied consistently and fairly without bias, corruption, or favoritism. Look at participation. Public participation in governance is vital for democratic systems. It ensures that citizens have a voice in decisions that affect their lives. Look at the quote of Amartya Sen. But when we look at India, we say India is a land of diversity. Even a question that was asked in the examination. India is a land of diversity, and here we have fragmented power structures. There are multiple layers of governance. There is central government, state government, local governments, informal governments as well. And this power is fragmented across castes, religions, regions, economic classes, sometimes leading to chaotic governance. Then look at the quote of Ashish Nandy, India's foremost sociologist. In India, governance is not a single system, but a multitude of overlapping power structures, each vying for legitimacy. So when we look at transparency, when we look at accountability, through laws such as RTI, through institutions such as Lokpal or CVC, the goal is not just to ensure corruption-free governance. The role is to ensure rule of law. Laws should be applied without any fear, without any favor, without corruption. And at the same time, you need to involve the citizens in participation. Look at the conclusion. Rethinking governance as a process of adaptation and negotiation. Because governance is not just about laws or regulations or institutions. It's about ongoing process of managing power, negotiating relationships. This topic has been holistically covered in my governance classes. And look at another question. Examine the effect of 2026 amendment to the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 on the right to privacy relating to self-identity under Article 21 of the Constitution. There was a NALSA judgment of 2013-14 where the Supreme Court recognized transgender as a third gender. The Supreme Court said that they are also socially and educationally backward, and in a sense urged the state to provide affirmative action policy, which means reservation in government jobs and educational institutions. Then we saw transgenders bill was passed. Then we saw a significant amendment in 2026 about self-identification. Previously, we thought that this self-identification is self-certification. You don't need to undergo a gender correcting surgery. You have to identify yourself as a transgender and that certification is valid. But now there is the role of the district collector in certifying you as a transgender. And this particular amendment was passed without any stakeholder negotiation, without any stakeholder consultation. Have we covered it? This is the snapshot of the governance class. How the role of a district, this is the snapshot of the UCAN class. A very important article was written in Indian Express, and we explained this article in great detail. And we have covered this topic at least 3 times. But because of the paucity of time, I could not come up with the screenshots of all those discussion things. But how do you verify your gender? What is the role of district authorities? How privacy gets affected? This is the question related to privacy. Right or wrong? And then how restricted view of transgenders is provided under this bill. Then we talked about that there is no consensus, no consultation with the stakeholders, which many constitutional experts argued is shocking when it comes to a bill of such importance, because there always has to be a pre-legislative consultation policy that needs to be followed, because you need to discuss the bills, which unfortunately is not happening. So even this topic, holistically, we have covered in the classes. What will happen if this law is being misused? Punishment, hard, walking back on hard-won rights. That was the title of this particular article in the Indian Express. Let's look at another question. Discuss what is meant by judicial legislation. Judicial legislation, now understand the topic of the essay, oxymoron, yesterday, which was asked in the examination. Judicial legislation is an oxymoron because there is separation of powers amongst the 3 organs of the state: legislature, executive, judiciary. Now, if judiciary becomes involved in lawmaking exercise, ideally that's not the job of the judiciary, but judiciary is invoking powers under Article 141, powers under Article 142, which is to give complete justice. And judiciary is trying to plug the loophole when a particular law is absent in a given situation or insufficient in a given situation. And that's how judiciary makes rules, or judiciary gives orders which has the same effect as the law, which is said under Article 141 of the Constitution. Vishaka Guidelines is one example of judicial legislation. Preventing ragging in educational institutions is another example of judicial legislation. Controlling the money and muscle power in student elections when the Supreme Court appointed a committee headed by former Chief Election Commissioner James Michael Lingdo, and then it came up with LCR, Lingdo Committee recommendations. That is the example of judicial legislation. But the question is asking, with special reference to the Supreme Court verdict allowing passive euthanasia and living will, can you find a link between this question and current affairs? The Harish Rana case of 2026. And we discussed that. Apex Court, Supreme Court upholds right to die for man in vegetative state. Remember that man who fell down from his 4th story of a hostel in Chandigarh, and for close to a decade he was sick, bedridden. Parents approached the court. High Court initially rejected. Matter went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said even this Ryle's tube that you are using to feed this particular individual, we can say it is an external device which needs to be shut down, and so that this person can die. What is the evolution of passive euthanasia? Supreme Court legalized passive euthanasia in the famous Aruna Shanbag v. Union of India 2011. Then there was an important, but this case is not only talking about passive euthanasia, it is also talking about living will. Supreme Court recognized right to die with dignity. Passive euthanasia, right to die with dignity, and right to have a living will in Common Cause 2018. And then significant changes were made in 2023 regarding common cause case, because in common cause of 2018 there were some rules made by the judiciary which were almost unimplementable, something that we have discussed in the UCAN classes. We discussed the Harish Rana case of 2026. But look at the importance of this judgment. One of the significant portions of the judgment is the applicability of the best interest of the patient test. The bench emphasized that the law does not ask whether death itself is desirable. It focuses on whether it is in patient's best interest that life should be prolonged by continuance of the particular medical treatment in question. These lines become very important if you write in your examination. Clear? Any questions as of now? Great. Discuss whether the right to vote is a fundamental right, the Election Commission's position on revision of electoral rolls, and whether it can examine voter citizenship. There are three parts to this question. Discuss whether right to vote is a fundamental right. It is not a fundamental right. Then what is it? It is a statutory right. Under which law? Representation of the People Act 1951. Cite judgments. The most recent judgment on this is the Anu Baranwal judgment, v. Union of India 2023. Even in another judgment in 2006, Kuldeep Nair v. Union of India, the Supreme Court emphasized that right to vote is a statutory right. Whether it is, there was another case, I forgot the name of that case. So many cases where the court has reiterated that right to vote is neither a fundamental right nor a constitutional right, but it is a statutory right under Representation of the People Act 1951. This is one part. Second part, the Election Commission's position on the revision of electoral rolls. Third, whether it can examine voter citizenship. ECI, and this is the snapshot of my Conquer Mains program, just before the mains examination this year. ECI can make limited inquiry into citizenship, but only for electoral purposes. Who said this? Supreme Court. In Association for Democratic Reforms case, where the Bihar's SIR, Special Intensive Revision, was challenged before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said ECI can make limited inquiry into citizenship, but only for electoral purposes. It cannot finally declare someone not an Indian citizen, because that power is vested with the competent authority under the Citizenship Act of 1955. Look at another snapshot. Deletion. Even if you are deleted from the electoral rolls, that does not mean we have determined or the Election Commission has determined citizenship. Deletion means only not eligible to remain on the electoral rolls unless eligibility is established. It is not a declaration that the person has ceased to be an Indian citizen. So all the three aspects you need to focus on when it comes to this particular question. But the question is also asking, look at the question again, position of the Election Commission of India when it comes to the revision of the electoral rolls. The law is clear. Article 324 of the Constitution, it gives plenary powers to the Election Commission of India. Powers which are unrestricted by the executive. Basically, this is something that I tell my students. If you can compare whatever Supreme Court can do under Article 142 of the Constitution so as to provide complete justice in a particular case, Election Commission of India can invoke Article 324 to ensure free and fair elections. Section 21 of the Representation of the People Act 1950. It talks about preparation and revision of electoral rolls. Section 21, Clause 3. ECI may conduct special revision in such manner as it thinks fit. So when you add sections, when you add law, when you add constitutional articles, when you add Supreme Court judgments, your answers would sound credible. That's what you needed to answer in this particular question. Examine whether the constitutional office of the Lok Sabha Speaker has become vulnerable to to partisan politics under the current anti-defection regime and the institutional changes required to ensure neutrality. This is a question which has been asked previously as well, but now in a different manner. For example, when we discuss PYQs of both prelims and mains in our comprehensive courses, we discuss all the PYQs. For example, this particular PYQ, once a speaker, always a speaker. Do you think this practice should be adopted to impart objectivity to the office of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha? What could be its implications for the robust functioning of parliamentary business in India? This question was asked in 2020 and now it has been reframed with specific reference to anti-defection law. And we have covered it. Speakers act as quasi-judicial tribunals in defection cases, but the Constitution prescribes no timeline for their decisions. This creates an anomaly where a defection case can theoretically drag on for the entire 5-year term of an assembly, allowing a defective member to escape lawful consequences and defeating the purpose of the anti-defection law. You can also cite a very important judgment of the court related to Manipur, where a 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court headed by Justice Rohinton Fali Nariman, and this is the judgment that I frequently cite in my classes. There was an MLA in Manipur Legislative Assembly, T. Shyam Kumar, who contested election on the ticket given by the Congress party, won the election. And after the election, he defected to the BJP. He was not disqualified because the speaker is acting in a partisan manner, because the speaker always belongs to the ruling party or the ruling coalition. He was not disqualified. Instead, he was made a minister. He was made minister, I think, of the forest. He was made forest minister. And then matter went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court initially gave time to the speaker. Please take decision. Please take decision. Kapil Sibal was the lawyer. But the speaker is not taking the decision, asking for more time, asking for more time, asking for more time. And finally, Supreme Court said enough is enough. And in this particular case, the Supreme Court invoked Article 142 of the Constitution so as to give complete justice and removed T. Shyam Kumar as a minister. And then Supreme Court gave time to the speaker. Now you need to act under anti-defection law. Speaker acted and disqualified. But it was in that case that Supreme Court basically nudged the parliament that it is time, and I'm quoting the Supreme Court verdict, it's time for the parliament to have a rethink on whether this power under anti-defection law should be entrusted to the speaker acting as a quasi-judicial body when the speaker continues to remain the member of the ruling party or the ruling coalition. It's time to rethink anti-defection law. So is the speaker vulnerable when it comes to anti-defection law? Yes, because there is no time limit within which the speaker has to act. And at the same time, speaker does not resign from his party once he or she is elected as the speaker. So what are the institutional changes required to ensure neutrality? 1, the speaker, once elected, should resign from the party which gave him the ticket which sent him to the legislature. Or we can even experiment with a British model, once a speaker, always a speaker, which means the speaker will remain the speaker for lifetime, regardless of his political affiliation. That's the regime, that's the reform, institutional change that is required to ensure neutrality. Then there are a few other questions. Again, because of the paucity of time, I could not come up with the screenshots, screen grabs of all these questions, but these questions also have been holistically covered in the courses. Women as a class neither belongs to a minority group, nor are they regarded as forming a backward class. Women is not a minority, nor are they part of any backward class. Our Constitution recognizes minorities either on the basis of religion or on the basis of linguistic identity. All minorities, whether based on religion or language, Article 30 of the Constitution. Nor are they part of the backward class. They are not socially and educationally backward as a class. We have SCs, STs, OBCs who are declared as belonging to social and educational backward classes of the society. But then you have to discuss the evolution of women's reservation from local bodies to parliament. Women have been given reservation. What is the percentage? What is the quantum of that reservation? Not less than 1/3 of the seats in Panchayati Raj institutions under 73rd Amendment. Urban local bodies under 74th Amendment should be reserved for women. And now we have Nari Shakti Adhiniyam, 106th Constitutional Amendment Act, which the government tried to pass in the parliament, but because of the political opposition could not be passed. In the light of this statement, discuss the evolution of women's reservation from local bodies to parliament. And we have discussed in the classes arguments in favor of women's reservation, although you don't have to mention that. But this topic also has been holistically covered in the classes. Okay. Discuss how far Indian federal framework has succeeded in accommodating regional and cultural diversities. The role of asymmetric federalism and measures to strengthen dispute resolution. Indian federal framework in accommodating regional and cultural diversities. Number one, Abhishek Manu Singhvi, and this is something that we have discussed in the classes, spoke about accidental federalism. That means the kind and shape of federalism that we see in India was not originally part of the constitution. It has evolved through various accidents. For example, LPG reforms. It was an accident and through which federalism strengthened. SR Bommai judgment of 1994. It was an accident and that strengthened federalism. Linguistic federalism, because we have created states in the name of language after the Poti Sriramalu episode, and that talks about regional and cultural diversities. We have Article 371 of the Constitution, which talks about giving protection to the cultural sensitivities of states such as Meghalaya, states such as Mizoram, states such as Nagaland. No law enacted by the parliament can automatically apply to Nagaland if it affects their social and cultural activities. Similarly for Mizoram. What are these? These are asymmetric federalism model. Then measures to strengthen dispute resolution. For example, regional tensions. Let's say when it comes to the resolution of interstate river water disputes. For that, we have Article 262, and which talks about then empowering the Parliament to enact a law. Parliament enacted a law known as Interstate River Water Dispute Act, and then there is a tribunal. We also have forum to discuss various issues affecting center-state relations in the form of interstate council. We also have forums such as zonal councils, although these are not constitutional mechanisms, but these are extra-constitutional statutory forums. We also have a forum related to, for example, we can discuss a lot of issues that we face, not just in zonal councils, but in interstate council, but also in forums such as national NIC, which has been disbanded. The last time a meeting took place was in September 2013. So there are areas to discuss federal issues. There are areas to discuss the resolution of the federal issues. We can also talk about an important aspect when it comes to special officer for linguistic minorities, where the president can appoint an special officer for linguistic minorities to discuss all the issues surrounding the linguistic minorities. Then examine how separation of powers is practiced in India compared to the US presidential model, comparing the Indian Prime Minister's actual authority with the US president's. Separation of powers, which has been attributed to French philosopher Montesquieu, it has been implemented in United States because of Article 1, 2, and 3 of the US Constitution, creating a watertight arrangement where the legislative powers are with the Congress, where the executive powers are with the President of the United States of America, the judicial powers are with the Federal Supreme Court, and they have incorporated checks and balances. But in India, since we are a parliamentary democracy, we have not implemented in its entirety separation of powers. There is no separation between executive and the legislature. Although, even though Constitution under Article 50 talks about there shall be separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary, not between executive and the legislature, because we are a parliamentary democracy. And in a parliamentary democracy, executive is drawn from the legislature. And as such, we can't have that strict separation of powers. Comparing Indian Prime Minister's actual authority with the US President. US President is the head of the government. But Indian Prime Minister is not the head of the government. He is not the head of the state. Head of the state is the President of India. But he is head of the government. But then you can quote various constitutional thinkers who are talking about what is the role of the Prime Minister, primus inter pares, whether he is just like any other minister or he commands more power as compared to other ministers. Because ideally, Prime Minister is a cabinet minister. He commands respect. And primarily right now, since the government has the brute majority, the Prime Minister's say is the final say. But what if it's a coalition government where there can be difference of ideas, difference of opinion? There, the cabinet will decide what is going to be the position. So it depends upon the Prime Minister's party, whether the Prime Minister's party enjoys full majority, absolute majority, or brute majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. Dr. Ambedkar said, why did we choose parliamentary democracy? We chose parliamentary democracy because we wanted to prioritize accountability over stability. If you want to go ahead with stability, for that there is a presidential form of government. If you want to have more accountable government, for that we have a parliamentary government. Do constitutional bodies like National Commission for Scheduled Castes, National Commission for Scheduled Tribes possess adequate enforcement powers to secure substantive social equality? Substantive equality talks about the outcome. You are providing equality by enacting a law, but you just don't need to look at whether the law is there or not. You have to look at what is the outcome because of this law. The outcome has to be equalitarian. But there are these institutions, for example, when National Commission for Backward Classes, which was previously a statutory body, and then it was given a constitutional status by 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act. This question was asked in the mains examination. Their powers, they have a role, they can play the role, but their views are only not binding on the government. They can advise the government on all matters related to the safeguard of NCs, of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. But do they have enforcement powers? No. These bodies should be consulted by the governments when it comes to any policy related to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Initially, there was one body, but these bodies were bifurcated by the 89th Constitutional Amendment Act 2003, although that's not the detail that you need to mention. Long story short, do they have adequate enforcement powers? No. They can advise the government. They can investigate all the measures which have been put in place for the betterment of the SCs and STs, but they don't have that enforcement power, right? And then what measures can you suggest to enhance their institutional effectiveness? That's what the question is asking. One last question. Discuss the position of the governor in India's federal polity, the nature of his power in giving assent to the bills, and whether he is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. And I don't think anybody would have struggled to answer this question because this question was expected in this year's examination. Discuss the position of the governor in India's federal polity. Part 1. The nature of the power in giving assent to bills. Part 2. Whether he is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Part 3. The governor is a constitutional link between the center and the states. In the words of Soli Sorabji, former Attorney General, he writes in Governor, Sage or Sabatar, the governor's role is not to act as the agent of the central government in the state, but to facilitate smooth relations between the center and the state. Article 163 of the Constitution enjoins upon the governor to act on the aid and advice of the Chief Minister and Council of Ministers, except in those areas where the governor is bound to act in his discretion. But what are these discretionary powers? We don't know, because these discretionary powers have not been defined in the Constitution. But Constitution does say, if at all there is a doubt as to what constitutes the discretionary power of the governor, the word of the governor shall be final, which means the governor gets to decide what are my discretionary powers. And in reserving bills for the consideration of the president, the governor is exercising discretion. When a bill is presented to the governor for assent, the governor exercises discretion. So the governor is not bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers when it comes to giving assent to the bills. The governor is acting in his discretion. Then there is no timeline within which the governor has to act on these particular bills. And then matter went to the court, where an important judgment was given by a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court in Governor of Tamil Nadu versus State of Tamil Nadu in April 2025, where a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court prescribed a time limit within which the governor has to act when it comes to the assent to bills. If there is an advice given by the Council of Ministers asking the governor that you need to sign these bills, the governor has 3 months to decide if you want to go against the advice of the Council of Ministers. And what if the governor is not following this timeline? You can approach the court will issue the writ of mandamus, forcing the governor to stick to this timeline, although this was considered to be judicial overreach because of the absence of timeline mentioned in the Constitution. But then you can also mention that there was a presidential reference. Article 143 was invoked by the president in sending this matter to the Supreme Court, and a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court said there can't be any timeline on the governor. A writ of mandamus cannot be issued against the governor. But then you can also write that even then, according to Supreme Court, because can a presidential reference overturn the judgment of the court? No, because presidential reference is only an advice to the government. It is still this judgment which is binding. According to Supreme Court's April 2025 judgment, the advice tendered by Council of Ministers to the governor, if you want to accept this advice, you have to accept this advice in 1 month. If you don't want to accept this advice, in 3 months, you have to send this bill back. And there is no such thing as pocket veto. This is something that Supreme Court has clarified, not just in the Tamil Nadu case, but also in the Punjab case of 2024, where Supreme Court said there is no such thing as pocket veto. These were 11 questions which were asked in today's GS Paper 2 Mains examination. Do let me know in the comment section whether you would have been able to answer these questions if you were writing the mains this time. And I can't tell this to the students who are appearing the mains examination because they would not be watching this video right now, and they should not be watching this video now. Now, these were the 11 questions that we needed to discuss. And if there are further questions that you have, you can let me know in the comment section and I'll be more than happy to answer. Now, over to Chetan sir to discuss international relations questions.
Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to the mains paper analysis. I really hope those of you who gave the exam have really answered these questions well, because as you have seen, the questions from GS paper 2, from polity, IR and social justice, even governance, are welcome to Unacademy, are fairly simple, quite manageable, and nothing was unpredictable. So when you look at the questions that were asked, there were 4 questions as usual from international relations for 50 marks. So let's take a look at these questions. Let's quickly analyze them and look at the answer writing approach. But before that, I have one important announcement. Those of you who are looking for guided assistance for mains answer writing, Unacademy is presenting the answer writing program, an advanced mains program, which is exclusively focused on building your answer writing skills. This program starts from 2nd September, will continue till January with 240 plus hours of classes. So here we will focus on PYQ based, theme based discussions. We will explore probable topics from current affairs, from the static portion, and provide that hand holding support to help build your answer writing skills. This also includes weekly practice questions with evaluation and a detailed feedback. Plus, you will get the written notes for every class along with the full length tests at the end of the course. So, this program is available at just 9,999. Those of you who are interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description below. You can also see the detailed schedule. Subject wise, it has been broken up over the next 4 to 5 months. And starting with polity and governance, where Sarmad sir and Jatin sir would be starting the program, followed by the other subjects. So, those of you who are interested, do check out the details by clicking on the link in the description. So, let's look at the first question from international relations. Question number 9, a 10-mark question for 150 words. This question was related to the Indo Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. Now, this is a topic which has been in the news over the last 3 years since it was established in 2022 under the Quad framework. But look at what the question is asking. The IPMDA bridges the gap between India's Sagar vision, security and growth for all in the region, with Quad's collective Indo Pacific strategy. So, that is a statement which has been provided, and UPSC is asking you to make a critical assessment of this statement, focusing on the partnership on maritime domain awareness. So these topics that have been picked from international relations, they were not only in news in the last 12 months. The questions per se are based on the static concepts related to these topics. So here you can't write a good answer to this question without bringing out the linkages between India's Sagar Mahasagar vision and the Quad collective framework. So what can be the approach? You can start out by elaborating on the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. If you're attending our classes, you would know that we had covered these topics in our classes. The very same topic we had discussed in Unacademy Platinum classes, in our Plus classes, even in our current affairs sessions and the recently held Conquer Mains program as well. So, when you look at the introduction, you can elaborate on the Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness, maybe shed some light on why maritime domain awareness is important in today's world for maritime security. Maritime domain awareness essentially provides for real time coverage and tracking and surveillance of any maritime threats. It could be threats from piracy or illegal fishing or organized crime and any other illicit activity, including terrorism or threat by hostile actors, which could pose a challenge to your security interests. So, bring out the purpose of the partnership of these Quad countries. It was set up at the Tokyo Quad Summit in 2022, and it consists of a widespread regional surveillance network consisting of radars, satellites, drones, which helps track the maritime traffic. And this data is shared amongst the Quad nations. Now, try to interrelate this with the vision of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, which was India's doctrine towards the Indian Ocean, launched in 2015. And recently, it has been upgraded in 2025 to the Mahasagar vision. Though the question is not mentioning it per se, you need to bring this out in your answers and explain how this partnership, which is mainly focused on maritime security under the Quad, can help extend India's Sagar Mahasagar vision towards the Pacific region as well. So, in the body, break it down into the security dimension, the technological collaboration that is required to make this partnership a success. So, under the security dimension, you can talk about the various threats which can be tackled through this maritime domain awareness partnership. As I said, you can mention piracy, illegal fishing, or any shadow fleets which might be posing a threat to rules based order, or organized crime and any terror and hostile activities can be better tracked with a real time surveillance system in the maritime domain. And that is what this initiative is built upon. Talk about the technological collaboration between the Quad nations, between India, US, Japan, and Australia. Here you need to mention India's IFC IOR network, the Information Fusion Center for Indian Ocean region, under which India has built an extensive network of coastal surveillance radars covering not just the mainland and the island territories of India, but we have installed these radar networks in friendly nations as well, like Mauritius, Seychelles. And this has been part of the Sagar vision. Maybe you can try to connect this with the visit of Prime Minister Modi in 2015 to Mauritius and Seychelles when these coastal radars were inaugurated and parallelly the Sagar doctrine was launched. So you can illustrate how maritime security is one of the core pillars of the Sagar vision, which is reflected in the Mahasagar vision as well. And it provides a wider coverage today. Mahasagar applies for the larger Indo-Pacific, whereas Sagar was largely restricted to the Indian Ocean region. So mention the IFC IOR, where all the radar data from these coastal radars is integrated into a command center in Gurugram that provides India a complete real-time picture of the shipping traffic across the Indian Ocean. Now, India will be sharing this data with the Quad partners, with US, Japan, Australia, integrating their networks and sharing maritime intelligence. So, elaborate on the technological aspect and bring out the benefits, the security benefits of this partnership, how it can help in collective security of the Indo Pacific, how it can help in joint military operations, interoperability, focus on disaster management and HADR operations. The same networks can be used for joint disaster management assistance operations because the Indo Pacific is highly prone to disasters from tsunamis to cyclones, and how these navies can coordinate their efforts while delivering humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Then also mention in the last part of the body that such a security oriented initiative will help establish the rules based order and ensure that international rules and international legal system can be enforced in the Indo Pacific. So this would essentially refer to any state threats posed by aggressive countries such as China, which has been assertive about its maritime claims, territorial claims. And the maritime partnership between the Quad nations actually serves this purpose as well. So, bring out China's sensitivity, how China looks at any Quad related partnership through the military lens, through the security lens, and opposes such initiatives, and how this could help India to create a counterbalance in the Indo Pacific and to deal with Chinese aggression and enforce a rules based order in the Indo Pacific. But since the question is asking you to critically assess, please point out that the Indo Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness, though it helps extend the Sagar vision and the Mahasagar vision and interrelates with the doctrine under the Quad, it may not exactly fulfill that bridge. It may not exactly be a link, right? It may not complete India's vision for the entire Indo Pacific because of late, the Quad grouping has often been given lesser priority, especially by the United States. For the last couple of years, no Quad summit has taken place. India is yet to host the proposed Quad summit. We are waiting from 2024. And the US has been almost sidelining the Quad summit with only ministerial and official level meetings taking place. So try to present this counter narrative as well to ensure that you provide a more balanced critical assessment. That the Indo Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness alone may not help extend India's Sagar Mahasagar vision into the Indo Pacific and interrelate that with the Quad's vision. Because Quad itself is seeing a downtrend. And especially from US, which is a key partner, it has been trying to sideline the Quad grouping. And that is one last conclusion that you can bring out while you end the answer. Now, when you look at the next question, question number 10, it's on the BRICS grouping. This again was an expected topic. We had discussed this in our plus and platinum classes, in our current affairs sessions as well. The question has been asked because India is currently holding the chair of the BRICS group, and we are all set to host the BRICS summit next month. So as a result, the BRICS grouping acquires a lot of importance. In fact, in the last few years, it has been making a lot of noise. It has gone through a big expansion with addition of 6 new members. A lot of new initiatives are being rolled out by the BRICS group. So read the question carefully. BRICS acts as a powerful counterweight in global governance, actively amplifying the voice and influence of the global south. So again, an open-ended statement asking you to explain the role of BRICS in projecting itself as an alternative to other groupings. So when you start the answer, maybe just elaborate about the group, a brief history, a brief background about the organization, how it was established formally in 2009, how it brought emerging economies together, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and later South Africa joined in 2010. Just a brief history of the group and explain the scale at which it has grown. Throw in some data pointers to further substantiate your answer. You can mention that today the group has expanded to 11 members spread across Asia, Africa, and Latin America region. And these countries account for nearly half of the world population, with almost 39% of global GDP and 23 to 25% of international trade. So this adds the weight to BRICS as an international grouping and how it can emerge as an alternate center of power compared to other groups such as, let's say, G7 or other global institutions led by the Western powers, including Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF. Because the very origin of BRICS goes back to the Western domination over Bretton Woods institutions such as World Bank and the IMF. In fact, the emerging economies of India, China, Russia, etc., they were frustrated with how the voting rights of these nations were not being increased. It was not being equitably distributed. And Western countries exercised a controlling stake, be it in World Bank and IMF, and how they would provide conditional assistance, mainly to serve Western economic interests. This has been one of the biggest complaints of the emerging economy since the early 2000s. So, BRICS as a group has always evolved as an alternate for the global financial architecture to create a new financial architecture that is separate from the World Bank and the IMF. So, you need to point out how BRICS can champion an alternative global governance framework. When you look at World Bank and IMF and the Western control, maybe you can mention the vote share, the voting rights that US and European powers have. World Bank, for example, is largely dominated by the US, whereas IMF is largely dominated by the European Union. And present an argument here how countries like India have often faced difficulties while taking assistance from World Bank and IMF. You can refer to the balance of payments crisis of 1991, how India had to meet some of the conditions laid down by IMF to devalue our currency, to liberalize, open up the economy, and pave the way for foreign investments, which would often compromise our economic sovereignty and strategic autonomy. It would largely benefit Western interests at the cost of the emerging economies. So, countries like India and the other members of BRICS, their main concern is with the misuse of institutions like World Bank and IMF and the lack of governance reforms. These institutions are stuck in the World War era. So, bring that analysis out in the body of the answer and explain how BRICS presents an alternate for global governance. Today, BRICS has diversified. It has set up its own credit rating agency. It is looking to establish its own undersea cable for digital sovereignty, right? So present all these examples and talk about the alternate development model that BRICS is trying to instill. Under BRICS, the new development bank has been set up as a counter to the World Bank. The contingent reserve arrangement has been set up as a counter to the IMF with equitable shareholding and ensuring that the founding members of BRICS have equal stake and equal control over these institutions. They have gone on to accept new member countries from across the world, from UAE to Uruguay. And the NDB in particular has been giving out developmental aid and assistance. So, mention how it is distributing the benefits to other nations, even the non members of BRICS who have joined the NDB and the CRA, and how it can emerge as a champion of the global south, representing the rise of the global south and the voice of the global south. Here, you can maybe even draw a parallel with India hosting the G20 summit and India hosting the Voice of Global South summit, and how the BRICS summit in this year will give a similar opportunity to raise the issues and concerns, mainly the economic issues, geopolitical challenges, even climate linked challenges that are affecting the global south. And that is how BRICS can emerge as a alternate power center in the current world order. But however, the question requires a balanced view. At the end of the body, try to include the limitations of the group. BRICS as a grouping has several limitations. The biggest challenge is the internal rivalries that exist within the group. For example, the India China boundary issues, which are constantly present. And the expansion which has happened recently has brought in a number of members from Iran to Egypt to UAE. But if you look at Argentina, it has not accepted the invite. It has rejected BRICS membership. Saudi Arabia is sitting on the fence. It is yet to decide whether to join the group or not. So bring out the internal inconsistencies. Also the political differences that exist. If you look at India, Brazil, South Africa, these are democracies. Russia, China, Iran, and even UAE for that matter, they remain authoritarian states. So the internal inconsistencies, they essentially affect the functioning of the group. It has often been projected as an anti-West alliance, and that creates a difficulty for India as India adopts a multi-aligned approach. So bring out these dilemmas that India faces and the limitations that are present within BRICS, and conclude by stating that BRICS indeed can act as effective voice for the global south as an alternate power center, but these limitations will have to be handled. Maybe present a point that India, as it is hosting the summit, can create a better convergence amongst the member nations, address the internal differences. You can even plug in the topic of de-dollarization. That's one more reason why the topic has been picked, as many countries, including India, Russia, are trying to move away from the dependency on the US dollar. And the Trump administration has been threatening tariffs against countries pushing for de dollarization. You can try to plug in that point as well to show how BRICS is emerging as an alternate power center. Next, coming to the 15 mark questions, question number 19. This is related to the Indian diaspora. In fact, if you look at the previous question papers, we have got such questions on the Indian diaspora. This time, the framing of the question is slightly different. In fact, even BRICS is again a repeat topic. So, once you have covered, let's say, PYQs along with some current affairs, trust me, handling these kind of questions becomes fairly simple. So, when you look at this question, India's global diaspora acts as a living bridge. That's the exact framing that we often use in our classes as well, right? If you look at the Conquer Mains that we held recently, or the current affairs classes on YouTube, or even in Unacademy Plus, whenever we talk about the Indian community abroad, I've always mentioned that the Indian diaspora is like a living bridge that acts as a cultural link, a soft power link, binding India with the community abroad, creating a global soft power influence for India. So the question is focusing on the critical economic factor, the knowledge network that the Indian diaspora has created abroad, and how it transforms our cultural influence, our cultural heritage into geopolitical leverage. So, how can this serve a strategic purpose across the world? Critically examine the statement. So, it's not specific to the Indian community in any specific country, it is worldwide. So, I would suggest start out your answer by talking about the spread of the Indian diaspora, the distribution. Throw some light, throw some facts over here. For example, you can mention that the Indian NRI community is 15 million strong. And if I take the PIOs, person of Indian origin, into account, that comes up close to 20 million. So cumulatively, the Indian diaspora abroad is around 35 million strong, approximately, right? So here I can mention specific countries where the diaspora concentration is massive. Countries like United States, Canada, UAE, Saudi Arabia. This is where Indian diaspora concentration is on a very large scale, and the community plays a very important role, right? They act as cultural ambassadors of India, bring out those aspects where the Indian community abroad is contributing to Indian influence, cultural influence. You can mention yoga, International Yoga Day, Ayurveda, influence of Indian movies, Indian music, classical art forms, even Indian food, festivals, and religious ideology and cultural influence. Throw in some examples to illustrate how the Indian community acts as cultural ambassadors abroad, pushing Indian cultural influence, and how this can generate soft power influence, because a good diplomacy is always a mix of hard and soft power. So try to bring in that conceptual argument and even mention a few countries where the Indian community is quite well spread out. You can even make a reference to the indentured laborers who are transported under British India, and how the subsequent generations today spread out across the Caribbean or in Fiji or in Mauritius. They form a vital living connection with India. Then talk about their economic contribution, not just the cultural influence, but the remittances they send back home. Today, India receives the largest remittances in the world. So throw in the data here. More than $135 billion remittances are being received, the inward bound remittances, which is crucial for bridging India's current account deficit. So talk about their economic contribution. When it comes to the knowledge network, the Silicon Valley is the perfect example. How Indian engineers are playing a pivotal role in big tech firms, or talk about the role of Indian doctors, Indian scientists in the American tech driven economy, or even in European research and innovation. You can mention space programs of European Space Agency, You have even NASA, where Indians are playing a pivotal role. You can talk about the oil and construction based economy in West Asia, from Kuwait to Qatar to Saudi to UAE. So try to throw in different examples because the question is focused on the diaspora across the world. Bring in Southeast Asia and the Pacific region as well. The Indian community's presence in Australia, Indian community's role across the Southeast and East Asia region. There you can even plug in the historical ancient medieval ties dating back to the Pallavas, the Cholas, and the deep influence of Hinduism, Buddhism that is seen across the region. How India leverages Buddhist influence as part of its Buddhist diplomacy, how we project Buddhist influence in Buddhist majority countries like Sri Lanka, Bhutan, or in Southeast Asian countries. So try to present all these arguments and explain how this can create a unique leverage for Indian diplomacy. This is where you need to add some successful examples. If you look at the India US nuclear deal of the Manmohan Singh government that was worked out between 2005 2008, the Indian community in the US played a critical role in exercising influence on the administration of George Bush and later on the administration of Obama. So that can be a great example. Or mention Qatar hosting the FIFA World Cup and how Indian construction workers played a critical role in being the backbone of the infrastructure projects in Qatar. Or talk about the oil based economy in West Asian countries. Or even discuss about, let's say, the technology driven and service driven economy of Australia, where Indian professionals are playing a critical role. So throw in a couple of examples and how it can help swing bilateral relations in India's interests to protect India's influence. So conclude by stating that this large, widespread presence of the Indian community in almost every country, in every nook and corner of the world, is creating a very unique influence, a unique leverage for India, which is adding to our diplomatic footprint. Then coming to the last question, the Belt and Road Initiative. Again, a repeat question. But this time, the question is very specific to South Asia region. How China's BRI has transformed South Asia from just a regional space into a theater of great power competition. So it's asking you to analyze the strategic implications of BRI for India's security and as well as regional influence in South Asia. See, recently there has been a lot of talk about the China Pakistan Economic Corridor, Shaksgam Valley, how the Belt and Road Initiative violates India's sovereignty with regard to our claims over Jammu and Kashmir, as well as China's new investments and projects from Bangladesh to Myanmar to Sri Lanka. They've all been regularly in the news. In the past 1.5 years, Chinese naval warships and spy research vessels have docked at Sri Lankan ports. Chinese investments in Bangladesh has been stepped up in the last 1.5 years, especially after the toppling of Sheikh Hasina's regime. Then China's projects in Myanmar has given China an alternate access to the Bay of Bengal. So because of all these developments, this particular question has been picked. So how will you approach the answer writing here? So first talk about the BRI. Present the historical context, how uh, it's a brainchild or a pet project of Xi Jinping, launched in 2013, and it seeks to create a global connectivity network. And it has two main components. One is the land-based component, and the other is the sea-based component. You can mention the 21st century maritime Silk Route and the Silk Road Economic Belt, through which China is building a series of strategic ports to establish maritime linkages. It is investing in road, railway, and pipeline projects, and electricity grids, power plants, industrial clusters, in order to establish deeper economic ties with Asian countries, African countries, even Latin American countries. You can even draw a rough map to show how the BRI almost encircles the entire world. And then, specifically with regard to South Asia, I think this is where a map would be even more relevant. If not a map for the entire BRI project, at least for South Asia region and the kind of Chinese investments in our neighboring countries. This you can present to illustrate the so-called string of pearls strategy of China, where it's believed that China is trying to encircle India with a set of strategic projects. So talk about the security implications. Name the projects one by one. Start with the CPEC project, how its alignment, which passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Gilgit Baltistan, and Shaksgam Valley, violates India's sovereignty and territorial claims over Jammu and Kashmir. Talk about the China Myanmar Economic Corridor, how it gives China an alternate route to Malacca and bypass Malacca Strait and directly access Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. Talk about its investments in Sri Lanka, Maldives. Maybe this can be part of the maritime threats that India faces in our neighborhood, or China's projects in Nepal, which has also joined the BRI. From Tibet, China is extending its road and rail network all the way till Kathmandu and Lumbini, right up to the Terai Plains, which borders India, posing a strategic threat to India. China is invested in strategic airports, could be the Pokhara International Airport in Nepal, the Matala Airport in Sri Lanka. Mention ports like Gwadar, the Hambantota and Colombo ports. Then you can even mention the island in Maldives that China has leased from Maldives, the Finolu Island, or the Kyokfu port in Myanmar. So mention these specific locations, if possible. Try to mark them on a rough map, just to illustrate your point. How it can create a strategic encirclement, how it can pose security threats, maritime challenges, because China can potentially use these commercial facilities for a dual purpose, for a security purpose. For example, the docking of Yongwang 5, a Chinese research vessel, which has the ability to spy on your rocket and missile launches, how it can collect data and how this can serve a military purpose. So try to present these real world examples, and as well as point out how these investments of China under the BRI counters India's traditional influence in the South Asia neighborhood. Right? Across the Indian Ocean periphery, India's traditional influence is being challenged by Chinese investments and Chinese presence. But while you end the answer, talk about India's way forward, like what India is doing to counter the Chinese investments. You can mention India's own projects. You can talk about India's cross border linkages with Nepal and Bhutan. You can talk about India's investments in Bangladesh, or the new projects that we have pushed in Sri Lanka, the Greater Malay Connectivity Project in Maldives, and how India is pursuing wider regional connectivity projects. You can even mention, let's say, IMEC corridor, the INSTC project, and the deeper linkages we are pursuing with East Africa and even Southeast Asia region. Throw in those examples to point out that India is not sitting idle. India has a counter strategy to try and ensure that we can limit the threat posed by China's Belt and Road Initiative in our backyard. So you can take the argument slightly beyond South Asia, covering the peripheries of the Indian Ocean, and explain the threats present and how India is trying to counter them. So that would help conclude the answer. So on this note, I bring this discussion on IR questions to an end. Just wait for a few seconds. Asta ma'am will be joining very soon to discuss the questions from social justice.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Unacademy. We are here to do an analysis of the questions that have come in GS paper 2, the paper that was conducted in the evening. We'll be discussing the social justice questions. If I'm clearly audible and visible, please let me know in the live chat and I will begin the session. Just write yes in the live chat. All right, all looks good. Now, when we look at the social justice questions, there were two 10-marker questions and three 15-marker questions, taking the total to 65 marks in GS paper 2. Without any further ado, let's start with the first question. Does India's tribal development policy reflect aspiration for socially grounded and equity based governance? Justify your answer. Now, tribal based question was fairly predictable. In fact, one of the introductions that you can write for tribals based question was that Forest Rights Act of 2006 has completed 20 years and the PISA Act of 1996 has completed 30 years. On account of these anniversary years, a question on tribals, either in GS paper 1 or in GS paper 2, was on the expected lines. Now, I understand this question can seem a bit complicated, but it truly isn't. If you break the keywords and try to understand what the question is really asking you to write. Let's do that. Now, it's saying that whatever we have done when it comes to tribals, the policies that we have, the provisions that we have, the schemes that we have, whatever welfare benefit schemes that are in place for tribals, do you think they reflect the socially grounded realities or aspirations? And equity-based governance. Aspirations for socially grounded simply means, do they reflect the autonomy given to the tribals? Do they have the decision-making powers for things that are related to their areas? Does it include participative governance or participative democracy? Are they heard? Do Gram Sabhas in these regions have a lot of power? Do they reflect the social uniqueness of tribal societies? That means, are we giving them certain unique protections? That means they can conduct their customary laws, they can have their particular type of livelihoods, etc. Basically, are the policies reflecting ground realities or their social aspirations which are different from mainstream society? And the second is, are these policies reflecting a special treatment? Equity means that those who are most vulnerable or who are the weaker section will be given the most assistance by the state. So is the state bringing about certain special schemes, provisions, in order to help the most weakest sections, that is the tribals here? So equity-based governance means that maximum assistance to the ones that are needing it the maximum. So that is special schemes for tribals, whether educational, whether economic, whether relating to budgetary allocations, etc. That is what you mean by equity, to ensure substantive equality, right? So special treatment or affirmative action for vulnerable sections. Now, of course, in order to justify this, you just had to write the steps taken that give tribals these autonomy, these rights, etc. The acts can be mentioned. And here, you just had to mention the specific schemes that were designed for tribal welfare. That was the requirement of this question, right? Let's look at some of the options that you could have written. For example, when you had to say that yes, we are focusing them on them particularly, equity. That means we are giving them some special treatment. Why? Because they are vulnerable. They are in need. There is historical injustice. They are not at par with the other sections. So for that, what have we done? We've had reservation in the constitution, both in terms of education, in terms of jobs, as well as in terms of elections. You can mention these provisions. These provisions are confirming that yes, equity-based governance has been the policy for tribals. You can also mention about the tribal sub-plan and say that separate budgetary allocations or per ministry separate expenditure is allocated for tribal welfare. You can also say specific schemes are designed not for everyone, but just for particular types of tribals, even the ones that are vulnerable within the tribal groups. So we have the PM Janman scheme for the 75 PVTGs. Equity within equity. You would also talk about certain Eklavya model residential schools, etc. that are providing specialized education, not for others. This is not like right to education for everyone. Specialized education for only which students? The scheduled tribe students living in these areas. So this is basically saying and proving that yes, equity-based consideration, focused affirmative action has been the policy for tribals. Now we also had to give certain examples to say that yes, we've respected their autonomy, their culture, we have given them the chance to govern themselves. We have enhanced participative democracy. We have not imposed the parliamentary laws. We've had asymmetry when it comes to certain exceptions that we've made for tribal regions. How have we done that? Using these laws. So Forest Rights Act does not strip away their livelihood. Even if they want to stay in the forest that they are occupying for about 75 years, 3 generations, 4 hectares of land is given as title rights under the Forest Rights Act. In the PISA Act, it gives a lot of powers to the Gram Sabha for self-governance. That means you need some form of consultation with the Gram Sabha for land acquisition of these areas, for the mining of minor minerals of these areas. We also have dedicated separate schedules that have very different governance for these areas, the 5th and 6th schedule, where there are tribal advisory councils that will advise the governor on certain matters relating to tribals. There is also autonomous district councils in various states. For example, the 4 states of Northeast. The Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council is an example. They can manage their affairs according to their own customary laws. And there are a lot of subjects on which the state will not interfere and they will make laws. So yes, we are giving them opportunities to showcase their aspirations and socially grounded realities. Article 371 is again an exception that provides for Naga customary laws, etc. We have also been recognizing their traditional knowledge. For example, the Kani tribe's traditional knowledge relating to a plant called Arogya Pacha is also being recognized. It is being documented. We are also including them in any kind of forest conservation. We are not alienating them from their traditional types of livelihoods. That is their socially grounded intervention. So we have we have basically accommodated their specific kind of livelihoods. For example, collecting tendu leaves, mahua, etc. And therefore, we have Vandhan Kendras where value addition can be made to tribal products. Basically, we are not changing the way they are socially grounded. We are giving them the autonomy. We've given them the participation, and that has been part of the development policy. But since the question says, does India's development policies reflect? That means a little bit of counter is also required. And you will say, even though we have these on paper, there are limitations. The Supreme Court, and time and again, has mentioned that FRA-based rights are not being recognized and there are evictions from these forested regions. A lot of mining projects are still leading to the displacement of tribals. One which was in the news was the Great Nicobar project affecting some tribals such as the Shompen tribe of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. We see that despite these kind of efforts, there is still development deficit that exists. Stunting is higher in tribals, poverty is higher in tribals, educational parameters are still lower in tribal children. Another important aspect is that a lot of these acts are often hijacked by administration or bureaucratization. That means these kind of powers for the Gram Sabha are on paper, they are for token, but they are not implemented on the ground. Their claims recognition is sometimes, or the claims under FRA are rejected. The tribals do not have the awareness to file for grievances or challenge the decision of the administration. So many times this decentralization that we are talking about is just on paper, tokenism. Last but not the least, a lot of the tribals are still not included. That means the social realities are still not fully known. For instance, there was a demand by various sections of the denotified tribes, the nomadic and semi-nomadic denotified tribes, to be included as a separate category, as not as STs. The Ideate Commission was also recommending the specific or separate category for DNTs, right? So these are the limitations that we will also talk about. An effect that are integrated with each other. That means, in the first place, it says that try to analyze that are there certain sections that are socially excluded, that face social exclusion, or they face a disadvantage in society. Social equity means, are you excluded? Is there marginalization? is there some form of disadvantage that you face in the participation of society vis-a-vis the other sections? Is there any kind of marginalization? So the first aspect is telling you to analyze. Is there a link between malnutrition and these vulnerable sections? Is it that malnutrition is seen more in these sections? For example, women. For example, scheduled tribes. For example, persons with special abilities. For example, scheduled caste. So that kind of link has to be made so that we see this as a multi-issue problem, not just as a basic hunger problem. The second is to also analyze if malnutrition impacts human development, your learning outcomes, your cognitive development, your intergenerational poverty, right? So that is the second part. The third is malnutrition still a welfare challenge? Yes. The government is seeing a major challenge. Earlier, the focus was on basic calorie-based food security. But now, the hidden micronutrient deficiency challenge is also arising. There is a dual burden also of malnutrition and obesity. So yes, in a welfare model or for governance also, malnutrition is a very big challenge. There are PDS leakages, there are inclusion and exclusion errors, there is a lack of dietary diversity that we give in take-home rations. There was also a lot of controversy associated with the protein intake. Millets were being proposed. So yes, we require certain changes and it is still a governance challenge as well. That is what we need to discuss in this 10-marker question. Your introduction, of course, can be by quoting the Global Hunger Index or the National Family Health Survey statistics relating to stunting and wasting. Here, as I said, are there certain groups that are more disproportionately impacted as compared to others? The answer is yes. You just had to prove that. That malnutrition is just not about the availability of food, but social factors also intensify the problem. For instance, in India, female children are less focused, their nutrition is less focused as compared to male children. And that is why we see, when we see anemic numbers, the prevalence of anemia according to the National Family Health Survey, we see that more than 50% of the women in the country are anemic. So yes, social factors, patriarchy, the neglect of a girl child is impacting the incidence of malnutrition. The reports also suggest that ST's children have 40% stunting compared to the national average, that is around 35%, way more than national average. So is there a social equity problem that is contributing? Yes. We also see regional disparities. Some areas where the development is less, they see higher malnutrition statistics as compared to others. And there is also intersectionality. Intersectionality means multiple vulnerabilities together. A child who's also having special abilities or disabilities, according to UNICEF, is 3 to 4 times more likely to be malnourished than the others. So yes, disability-induced malnourishment as well. Right? The next part is to see that is malnutrition just a hunger problem? No. It has manifestation in your human capital development. In fact, various ACER reports, UNICEF reports say that there's a very clear link between the nutritional status of a child and the performance in the classroom or educational outcomes. The children that are malnourished have lesser cognitive development and performance in the educational sphere. This, of course, can impact the workforce that is going to be created in India. The demographic dividend that we talk about, the workforce first has to be healthy, educated and skilled in order to give the dividend back. World Bank's Human Capital Index estimated that a child born in India today will reach only 50%, 49 to 50% of their total potential. One of the major reasons of this stunted potential is what? Is malnutrition. So, intergenerational poverty, for example, a child who is suffering from malnutrition will have poor educational outcomes. With this, will have lower economic prospects, and with this will again have a chance to fall into poverty. So poverty creating malnutrition and malnutrition creating poverty is a vicious cycle that will hamper human development is what you can also write about. Intergenerational poverty or vicious cycle of poverty. The next linkage that is being asked with malnutrition is it still a welfare governance challenge? Yes, it is. In fact, the CAG audit has repeatedly flagged various problems and implementation, exclusion errors, inclusion errors. So there are gaps. There is a problem in take home rations, the quality of it, the lack of dietary diversity. We are still obsessed with calorification when it comes to food security. That means just sufficient calories to be given. Not enough protein intake, not enough fruits and vegetables, leading to major problems of hidden hunger, micronutrient deficiency. Right? So this becomes a problem, a welfare challenge as well that you will write about. There is also convergence deficit. That means malnutrition, sanitation, education of the mother. These are all interrelated things that impact one another. If we just treat it as a mere hunger problem, in solving it, that means only one ministry is solving it and not all other ministries. For example, of WASH, of women and child welfare, of health, etc. If they don't come together, then there is going to be a convergent deficit in the way we are treating this as a governance challenge. Right? So this is something that you can write about in this question. Next question. Analyze the extent to which pressure groups, social movements, and corporate lobbies deepen pluralistic democracy in India. Extent. That means, first part of the question, we have to talk about how pressure groups, social movements, and corporate lobbies, they lead to deepening of democracy. Why? Because they are taking up the voices of different sections, adding to a pluralistic or deepening of democracy. How does democracy deepen? When the voices of all those who constitute the population are heard in some way or the other. Pluralistic means all diverse opinions of all sections are therefore represented, they are heard. So how do these three contribute to a diverse democracy? To how much extent? So first we are going to praise them by giving examples that yes, it does. It increases the representation, it holds the democratic institutions accountable, it becomes the voice of the voiceless, it brings up newer issues, it does not wait for electoral politics, etc., etc. Then we are going to also talk about limitations, that they are not sometimes all representative, they are taking up sectional interests. It can lead to crony capitalism, it can lead to excessive influence on the government, etc. And the second part, where the question is asking you to analyze that does the growing corporate political convergence threaten democracy in India? So first you will write the problems. What will be the heading? The problems associated with excessive corporate political nexus. What all problems can happen if the corporates or the industrial sector in the country starts influencing how the country is run, how the laws are made, how the regulations are made. Will it reduce the democratic institutions' autonomy? Will it reduce the parliament's autonomy? Will it reduce the regulators' autonomy? So the problems relating to corporate political nexus or the problem related to excessive corporate lobby. We will discuss the problems, right? And because they asked you whether growing this, that means you will also do a little bit of a counter where you will say still corporate presence is important because of X, Y, Z, 3 reasons. So that is the structure of your answer. First talk about how these lead to pluralistic democracy. Then basically talk about the limitations of it. Then talk about the problems of excessive corporate influence on the democratic institutions. And then conclude by saying that even then some corporate influence or corporate sectors collaboration is important, right? So that is how you structure this answer. Whenever we have to write the first part where you have to say yes, they lead to democratic or pluralistic democracy. We give examples. For example, the MKSS movement, Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan. It is because of this pressure group or this movement that led to right to information, a very important tool that empowers the citizen to hold the democratic institutions accountable. Certain social movements such as the Narbata Bachao Andolan for protecting the rights of the voiceless, that means the tribals. We also say that certain sectors whose interests are not taken up are also taken up by, for example, you would have heard about certain strikes by Uber workers, by Ola workers, by delivery partner workers, for example, for Zomato, Swiggy, etc. And with this, some kind of social security to gig workers was provided. So, yes, sector specific interests are also taken up by this. The gig workers union successfully pushed for Karnataka's law to give social security. The Samyukt Kisan Morcha had taken a very important role in the times of the repeal of the farm laws in 2021. Right? It deepens deliberative democracy. That means, yes, you do not wait for the parliament to come into picture. You start the dialogue by these pressure groups. For example, there was a lot of Gen Z protests. These are examples of social movements that acted as a pressure group to bring about changes or to bring about some form of accountability when it comes to India's examination system. The rights of people can also be advocated beyond electoral politics. That means we do not wait for a law to be pushed. Some social movements, for example, pride movements, transgender rights movement, Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi's work associated with this have led to the Nalsa judgment, the judiciary stepping in because of the pressure groups advocating for these rights. Right? So, yes, they are catalysts for change, absolutely. They also improve the accountability. How do you deepen democracy? When these that are in power are accountable to you. For example, PUCL can be an NGO, can be considered as a pressure group as well. They secured the adoption of nota. That means if the candidate does not want to vote for anyone, they can press this and showcase their resentment. The corporate lobbies also deepen pluralistic democracy. For example, they can give a lot of inputs on new technology. Since they are also running the industry, they have a lot of insights. So, for example, when India was making the AI governance guidelines, NASSCOM as a pressure group was very, very instrumental in giving expertise to the government of India for policy making. Right? The industries that are traditional industries or they can be ignored, they are also in case. For example, India's Cellular and Electronics Association had advocated for various incentives that should be given to promote the semiconductor mission in the country. Right? So, yes, corporate lobbies are very, very instrumental as well. In fact, if you would have known, UPI, which has transformed the digital infrastructure or has led to digital democratization of payment system in the country, that is also in collaboration with maybe the corporate or industry. The pressure groups have advocated for the demands of various vulnerable sections. For example, the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh has influenced the government taking up a role in pushing the labor codes as well. So these are all examples that you can write to substantiate the first part. In the second part, you can say that yes, but these groups to some extent are not representative enough. They might just take up their own demands of their own section. They might exclude the other vulnerable sections. For example, the DNTs are not represented when it comes to most of the ST demands. They might lead to excessive activism, might lead to disruption in day to day. For example, rail roko, disruption in railway services, traffics, etc. And of course, this can lead to a lot of opaque pressure. That means we do not know how the government is going to be funded. Will the government be influenced only for industry standards? And will dilute certain laws that are even important for public health in order to fulfill the quid pro arrangements with the industries. So yes, the opaque nature of corporate lobbying is also worrisome. We'll discuss this also in the second aspect, right? Now, Here we are discussing how the corporates' influence, excessive influence on politics can be detrimental and reduce the autonomy of institutions. That is also part of the question. Of course, remember how the Supreme Court had struck down the electoral bond scheme. That means a voter has the right to know that the political party that they are voting to power is being funded by which kind of people and which interests. So the voter can have an analysis that these policies that are made are not just made to favor one particular industry, one particular corporate lobby. Even if they are getting donations, that should be in open. The opacity of the electoral bond scheme would have made these institutions, for example, the parliament or those who are parliamentarians or the executive, might have some form of pressure to maybe opening mining projects. Why? Because the corporates that are dealing with mining projects are only funding them. Does the voter know about this nexus? No. Which is why the electoral bond scheme was struck down. So electoral fairness has to be ensured, financial asymmetry has to be removed. That is one of the major dangers of corporate or crony capitalism or capitalist and political nexus. We also hear about various policy captures. That means there have been various kind of allegations, corruption scandals that have happened in the country, where certain favoritism was given to some relatives, to some industries on a quid pro quo basis. That means this kind of opacity can lead to bribing, can lead to corruption, and can lead to a nexus. So 2G spectrum scam, coal block allocation, etc. is again an example of the problems or consequence of excessive corporate influence on politics. It can also distort priorities. That means if our legislative priority is to preserve health of individual, we would be very strict in controlling tobacco advertisements, alcohol, etc. But since these tobacco companies or alcohol companies are deriving their profit from them, they might pressurize the government to slightly weaken the legislation, to slightly be lenient and not create excessive regulations for public health. So strong industry lobbying by tobacco companies has often delayed stricter regulations. That means whatever was the priority might be blurred because of the pressure from corporates. It might also lead to the revolving door governance problem. Revolving door governance problem means some senior officials, they start giving certain preferences to certain, when they are regulators. For example, they are telecom regulators. For example, there are other regulators. So if they are in the telecom regulatory sector and they are ensuring that the industry or that company is working well, the company might offer them lucrative jobs after they retire from government services. And this might create a give and take nexus. Because of that, the regulator's independence might be compromised. So former bureaucrats joining corporate advisory boards after retirement can be another issue when it comes to this nexus. Of course, the major collateral damage can be environment. That means environment protection laws can be diluted, environment impact assessment can be made post facto. If these companies push for easy mining leases or easy construction norms, etc. So major damage can be environment, right? So this becomes an aspect. Another major aspect is inequality. These big companies, MNCs, etc. might also call for certain monopoly-based advantages that might even hurt the local MSMEs that are operating in that area as well. And of course, certain papers, etc., that come to light can also severely impact the public trust in democratic institutions, right? So this is something that you can write about in challenges. But of course, because it is asking you whether this nexus is bad only, So you will also say, but no, corporate or corporates also have an important role to play, a positive role to play. That means a lot of digital public infrastructure framework is held by, for example, corporates or pressure groups or corporate lobbies such as NASCOM, UPI infrastructure, etc. They give very important inputs on policy making, right? They strengthen the public private partnership when the government does not have sufficient funds. And of course, they boost employment and investment in the country. So you wrote about a few good examples as well. Let's come to the next question. Examine whether the constitutional mandate. Now, this was a question that required, listen to me very, very carefully, very good interpretation. But, ladies and gentlemen, this could have been attempted if you had broken down the keywords with some form of patience. Again, easier said than done. Let's break down the keywords and understand the demand of the question. Examine whether the constitutional mandate of rights-based welfare. Let's focus on this part only. Rights-based welfare means you have a right to food, you have a right to life, you have the right to privacy, you have the right to, for example, health, you have a right to education, etc. These are the rights that are provided to you. Some by fundamental rights that are enshrined in the constitution, some by laws. For example, the MG Narega Act and now VBG Ramji is giving you, in a way, a right to livelihood. So basically, these are the rights that we are talking about. These rights that are guaranteeing some form of welfare benefit to you that the state is obliged to provide to you. For example, the state is providing the PDS ration. The state has the National Food Security Act that is making a legal right to food. So yes, we have a constitutional mandate, we have laws in place, we have fundamental rights in place that make a citizen ask the government that yes, you need to provide me this because this is a legal mandate. Provide me these health facilities, provide me these food related facilities, provide me with these education related facilities. For example, the Right to Education Act is again a right. It is an obligation on the state, but it is a right that you can rightfully claim. That if you are a child up till 14 years of age, it is your right to get an education, to get an admission in a government school. Right? So that is how we break the first part. Now the question is saying, can this, whatever rights that we have promised, can we deliver these rights? Can we fulfill these rights even when governance is not integrated? Even when public investments in these domains is not enough? They are asking you a question. That is just giving these rights enough? When these two other aspects which are very important, they are not fulfilled. Basically, we need to talk about the importance of constitutional mandate or rights, but saying that yes, there are limitations. Why are there limitations? Limitations because governance is working in silos. For example, if you are countering malnutrition, Ministry of Women and Child Development is not working with Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health is not working with Ministry of Education. And that matter to avoid hunger or to basically give the right to health or food is not being seen holistically, integratedly. So is the lack of integrated governance a challenge that is leading to the denial of the realization of these rights? Yes, we will write about the problems. We often hear about India's very low investments. We are not investing enough in health, it is less than 2% of the GDP, etc., etc. A lot of government schools do not have the infrastructure, they do not have the teachers, the infrastructure in Anganwadis and ICDS services is very, very minimal. In that case, is public investment a hindrance? Yes. So even though these rights are important, but sometimes these rights will remain on paper if these two problems are not rectified, is what the question is asking. So now we divide this question. Now these I have just written as examples so that it is clear to you. The right to food under Article 21, we provide it by the National Food Security Act. We give PDS rations. Right to livelihood under the MG Narega Act and now the VB Ramji Act. Right to education under Article 21A. Right? Right to health recognized in a way by publicly funded Ayushman Bharat PMJ scheme. Right? Right to nutrition under the Poshan Abhiyan. Right to privacy that is also given. Tribal rights that are also provided under the FRA, Forest Rights Act. Title rights, community rights, etc. So these are examples of constitutionally mandated rights-based welfare. Are all these being implemented? Is no individual in the country going to bed without food? There are. Is everyone getting employment? No. Is everyone educated? No. Is health provided to every individual? No. Why? Because of these constraints. What are the constraints? The challenge is that governance is not integrated, and another challenge is that the government is not investing enough in these social sectors, in health, in education, in skilling, in better environment, in nutrition, etc. So here just remember that we write some parts that yes, rights-based framework is very important. Why? Because it makes it a legal entitlement. The state cannot shy away. The state will not say whenever we feel like we will do it. It is not charity. It is a legal entitlement. That means it can be enforced. If it is violated, you can go to the judiciary to get it enforced. It is not arbitrary. That means the state cannot say today we are accepting your right, tomorrow we are not. It is not a scheme that changes every day. That is why it is good. It ensures the continuation of certain rights. And it ensures basic human dignity is preserved. That is why we keep increasing the scope of Article 20. Right? Yeah. So that is why you're saying that rights-based approach is also very important, but it has limitation and challenges. Why? Because of departmental silos. Nutrition is a matter that requires wash services, health services, ICDS interventions, ASHA workers, the nutrition of the mother, iron and folic acid tablets, nutrition also in education institutions, so educations, right? Poshan Abhiyan also still faces coordination issues, which is why we say that these rights remain on paper because of departmental silos, working in isolation. Sometimes beneficiary databases are not made from one state to another. In earlier times, there was lack of portability of benefits. PDS rations could not be taken. Then we had one nation, one ration card scheme. We also have weak center-state coordination. For example, a lot of tussle associated with the implementation of PM Shri schools. The centrally sponsored schemes, the center is releasing funds way later. So these kind of coordination problems at the two governance levels is also impacting. A lot of states also denied that we will not be implementing the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Again, hampering the right to health that we were trying to provide to the citizens. There is very little local level convergence. That means you're not taking the consideration of the ASHA workers, the ground level workers. And that is why a lot of districts are left behind. And weak redressal mechanism. That means even if it is not being followed, there is hardly any governance or integrated governance. People have to go from one area to another to another. The blame game is very important or very easy. For example, if there is excessive flooding, pollution, you have a right to a clean environment. But because governance is not integrated, there can be very easy blame shifting. That it is the blame of the MCD, it is the blame of the JDA, it is the blame of the civic body, the municipal body, etc. Right? So that is the problem with the lack of integrated governance. The lack of public investment is, of course, a major challenge. We are investing less than or just around 2% of the GDP when it comes to public health. Public health for a country like India, where still a huge portion of the people are vulnerable, cannot be outsourced to private healthcare infrastructure, which is why the situation and condition of public healthcare, the beds are not updated, the infrastructure is not updated, etc. When we look at education, the salaries are not given, there is teacher shortage, there is teacher absenteeism, the classrooms are not smart, basic toilet facilities are also lacking in certain government schools according to UDICE portal reports. Electricity is also lacking in some schools. So of course that requires money that has to be put in these sectors. Otherwise, the right to education as a right remains on paper. Right? There is inadequate development of tribal areas. There is the Anganwadi sectors. Even though we are running the schemes, but the schemes are lacking the budgetary allocation that it requires. Right? So MG Narega wages are often facing a lot of budgetary constraints as well. So the challenge is also due to minimal public infrastructure. You can just, when you're writing the conclusion, write certain solutions. That means you can pop some words from governance. For example, we need a saturation approach. Saturation approach means that we do not need more schemes. We need the coverage of all people, of all beneficiaries for those limited schemes that are already in place. The economic survey had spoken about the saturation approach. We need a whole of the government approach. That means all ministries at all level will work together. Interministerial coordination. Plans between municipal bodies and local bodies. Right? Participative democracy, etc. We also need, for example, schemes such as aspirational districts program, where various ministries are coming and working together to ensure development in that region, targeted development. Right? So these are examples and solutions that you can also add just to conclude, to give solutions on how to fix this problem of ensuring rights-based welfare. Last question. Critically evaluate whether education should be treated primarily as a welfare obligation of the state or as a strategic investment for building a globally competitive, knowledge-driven nation. Now, of course, the answer is very simple, that is both. But then, how do we answer this question? First, we answer this question by saying the importance of providing education as a welfare obligation by the state. That no, education should not just be seen as a return on investment, but education as a multiplier effect on various other aspects. Enhances the capability of a person, enhances the critical thinking in a society, enables a person to take up economic independence. It is the obligation of the state to provide basic bare minimum, etc. So first we will talk about, yes, it is important to look at education not just from a return point of view, but as an enabler for all other things, just to ensure human development. It has an impact on every aspect of a human. The decisions that they will make, the health awareness that they will have. For example, for women, the median age for marriage for women, etc. So it is not just a return on investment that we have a workforce that is educated and that is going to benefit the country. That is not the case. Education alone is very important, and therefore it should be a welfare obligation for the government. The government should ensure that it is some portion of it is publicly funded. It is given as a right to education, free till 14 years of age, etc. Right? The government should not completely outsource it based on returns. But at the same time, you will write then in few points after writing this, the limitation or problem with a welfare only approach. When we look at it only as a welfare, we just say, let's just do attendance, enrollment. Quality does not matter, right? We just look at providing or fulfilling the right to education in Article 21A. Research and innovation does not matter. We just say let children pass, no detention policy. Expertise and employability does not matter. So those are the problems in just treating it as a welfare obligation. And that is why we write those small problems here. Then we again create another portion in the structure where we say that it should also be looked as an investment for a knowledge-driven nation, for a competitive knowledge-driven nation. Here, of course, we talk about the impact on demographic dividend, to create a workforce that can be employed, a workforce that can be sent outside, for example, India's diaspora, a workforce that is has expertise in research and create new technologies to solve India's problems, etc. That means specific education that can bring returns to the country. Yes, that is also very important. And then again, we make a box and we say caution. That means the problem relating to seeing it only as an ROI. What is the problem? Because if we do this, we will maybe work on commercialization of education, right? We will only have those world-class institutions. Then what about affordability of education for all? A lot of other sections will be left behind. If we see only education as those who can afford it should be given the training, then socially a lot of communities are also going to be excluded. So that is how we critically evaluate, because it is a 15-marker question. I hope the structure for this is clear. Let's start with this. Just understand basic aspects. First, education is a welfare obligation. Yes. It is essential RTE, compulsory education. Why? Because it provides, it acts as an enabler. It includes, it removes historical injustice. Education works as an equalizer, gives opportunity, allows for you to compete on the basis of merit and not caste and other social identities. It's important. It is also important in the context of Amartya Sen's capabilities approach, that teach a person how to fish and not just feed them. It breaks the cycle of poverty. It acts as an enabler. Education, economic opportunities, and therefore breaking the cycle of poverty. It builds human development. Yes, people have better civic sense. They can take better decisions for their health. For example, women who are educated to a certain stage are taking up proper breastfeeding practices for their children. So it will impact intergenerational health outcomes as well. Women who themselves are educated will invest in the education of their children. So it creates a good loop, a positive feedback loop as well for human development, right? So that is why it will strengthen democracy, because an informed citizenry, yes, a virtuous cycle, an informed citizenry will also ensure that they are voting for the right thing, for the right reason, and they are not just voting on popular schemes, right? They can analyze the state well, etc. So they're capable of participation. So yes, it is a welfare obligation as well. It has impacts way more than just ROI. Then issues with this approach is, if we just look, if the government just says, oh, we just need to ensure that enrollment rates are high, what is happening because of this? Quality gets jeopardized. Various ACER reports have mentioned that 50% of students in class 5th struggle to read a class 2nd text. Why? Because we are just seeing this as an obligation. That should not be the case. Very few educational institutions are represented in Times Higher Education World Rankings. Why? Because there is lack of research, competitiveness, quality. Economic Survey has at various times spoken about the lack of employability of India's graduates. 50% are not employable. There are teacher vacancies. There are nearly 10 lakh teacher vacancies, and therefore this is also impacting the quality of government schools. So yes, there is an issue with treating it only as a basic welfare rights driven measure. Should it be important as a strategic investment? Yes, absolutely. For example, if your workforce is educated, if your workforce is skilled, this workforce will be working in various economic sectors, for example, services sectors. For example, as diaspora that are getting jobs outside, sending back some form of remittances in the country as well. So, yes, human capital, in order to reap the demographic dividend, what do you need? You need human capital that is educated. So, yes, this is not just an investment as a welfare, it is a return that India or any country is going to reap. If education is provided in world class institutions here, it might solve India's problems. For example, scientists can bring in new technology for solving certain problems relating to water scarcity, etc. We have Anusandhan National Research Foundation. The idea is to promote research for industry requirements. We will also become globally competitive. That means India's workforce will be very talented and required. That means India's diaspora can also get jobs outside. It will support new jobs, education. If we invest in education, it will lead to easier transformation or transition to the new economy that is going to be coming, the industry 4.0, AI, automation, etc. That requires constant investment in education, in knowledge driven sections, so that India's workforce does not become redundant later. It is very also important for demographic dividend and also to get investments. That means when various companies are changing from or shifting their base of production from maybe South Korea, Japan, where there is aging, and they are looking for cheap labor, but they also would want educated and skilled labor. So, therefore, if you want to attract investments, you want these countries to reshore, shift their bases from there to here, you have to give them a globally competitive, educated, and skilled workforce. So, yes, this is very important for even the FDI returns for India. And of course, it is going to enhance India's soft power because of Indian students abroad, for example, engineering students, doctors, etc. We can also have various exchanges. Global universities are also now opening in India because of the potential associated with India's education system. So, yes, it does bring in a lot of returns. Education as a sector, if we invest in. The problem for seeing it as an investment is that best education is only going to be given to those students who can afford those kind of interventions. Which is why the welfare approach is also important. Why? Because then education will be commercialized. Privatization of education is going to exclude so many students. Various surveys says that 9 times of government school spending is on private schools. The fees is almost 9 times higher, right? A lot of communities will be excluded if this just becomes a profit seeking venture, an investment and return venture, right? The employment focus, if we are only training people for becoming ruthless coders, etc., this will take away from the education that we need to give them when it comes to constitutional values, ethical education. The NEP has reiterated that ethical value based education also has to be given. So no, it just cannot just be seen as a investment and a return on investment, right? So these are the points that you will also write in the counter why it cannot be seen just like that, right? So with this, we have come to an end for the discussion for today. I hope you got an understanding, a gist of how you should be preparing in case you're preparing for 2027, what kind of questions are coming, how do you break the question, understand the demand, and in case you have written the exam today, please watch this not today but later. I'm sure you have done absolutely well. We are nevertheless so proud of you for however it has gone, and I'm sure it would have gone very well. Thank you so much. Allow us to wrap up for today. We will see you again tomorrow on the YouTube channel for the analysis of GS paper 3 as well.